Hey guys, Nicole here with Obscure Reptiles and Caging, and today we're going to be talking about PVC racks versus PVC enclosures. So let's get started. Hey guys, so today we're going to be talking about the differences between PVC racks and PVC enclosures. We'll start it all off by saying I don't really like glass. For those of you who've seen my other videos, I think glass works great for fish, and a couple different colubrids who need it a lot cooler and are a little bit more adaptable to cooler or lower humidity enclosures. They do okay with that, but if you're going to have just about any reptile, I feel like you should always give them the best that you can, and normally that means anything from a rack to a homemade enclosure, which could be made out of wood as long as it's sealed properly, or something like a PVC enclosure. It's also very much going to depend on what animal you have, you're keeping, or you're breeding. Because what I use everything for are bearded dragons, acumonitors, and ball pythons. That's what I'm going to be talking about. But it all is going to depend on what species you have or that you're breeding. So the first thing we're going to talk about is how much space do you have? So if you're like me and you have quite a few animals, space is a big problem and issue, especially when you're trying to keep everything in one room, not space it out throughout the entire house. So the first thing is space. So we all know that every different reptile has different space requirements. For example, a ball python can live very happily if it's an adult in a 3x2x1. A very large female could get away with a 4x2x1, but the minimum standards would be a good 3x2x1. So if you're going to get an enclosure, something like this is a stack of 3x2x1. It's nice because these are stackable. These were ones that I built last year. The nice part is they're stackable, but you can still only go about, say, 5 or 6 high to be able to comfortably access the enclosures. And then if you're putting them on wheels, or if you want to set them on something, you have to also account for that. So if you're somebody who has, let's say, 50 snakes, that is going to take up a very large amount of space to be able to give them that type of setup and that type of look. But if you look at something like this is a rack. They don't have to be made out of PVC. Again, they can be homemade. They can be made out of things like melamine and stuff like that. But we're just going to talk about PVC because that's what I have. So something like this saves on a lot of space, but it's not as nice to look at. Some people think it's not as good for the animals, but we're going to get into all of that in this video. I personally think if you have something like ball pythons, a rack, if it's appropriately sized, can work wonders for ball pythons. In the wild, they're known to hide. You don't really see them very much because they're too busy hiding and staying out of sight. So by putting them in something that is a front open enclosure like this, it is better than, for example, a glass tank. But if you want to have a pet ball python and then you want to put in something like this, I think go for it. In my personal experience, when it comes to breeding ball pythons, the more you leave them alone, the more they're secluded, the more they feel comfortable, the better they tend to breed because the more relaxed and the more comfortable they feel. My ball pythons have 41 quart bins, even the males, as long as they've reached at least 1,250 to 1,300 grams. And even when I have a male and a female in the same enclosure breeding, they don't even use up half the space that's in there. That's not to say using a front opening cage is bad for breeding. It may or may not be. It also depends on where you're going to put them, like what location in the house. So if you have a very loud, noisy living room, you've got a bunch of, like, let's say kids, or you play loud music and the animals are in that room, they may not breed because they may be stressed from all the noise, from all the different sounds, and being able to see out. If you can see them, they can see you, which means that they don't have enough hides, which may mean they might not have enough hides. If you're going to give them more space, they need more spaces to hide. You don't want to just have a big, 3x2x1 enclosure with one hide on it. Using a rack with a hide, I also like to use these. Not only do I have different size hides, this one's a smaller one. I would normally put this for a smaller snake that's in, for example, one of the 28 quarts. I got bigger ones for the females in the 41 quarts. But I also like to use these. These are water dishes. They're actually dog dishes, and the reason I like them is they have this nice little lip here, and no matter how big the female is or male, they will use this little bit of a lip to push it up, and they will completely sit around. Not only does it work for a hide, it also works for a cool hide. One stage of the breeding is when the female just wants nothing more than to get as far forward and as away from the heat as they can. This way they go right underneath here, and it's also a very good sign. You always want to make sure you at least have a water dish that not only they could get into, but they can access easy. I like using these, that way they can actually get in them, and they can also use them as a hide. But if I was to use something larger, like here for example are front opening enclosures for Ackie monitors. They use a lot more space than snakes, or the snakes that I have at least. They've got a lot of different cork bark. They've got PVC tubes. I've actually buried several of these underneath their substrate, so that way they have little burrows that they can sleep in. That way I know that it's not caving in on them. Makes me feel a little bit better putting these. I bury them, and there's all different types of things for them to hide in. If you're going to have it, for example, a ball python in a very large enclosure, something like, let's say, a 4x2x1 or 5x2x1, it's a full-grown snake, you're going to put it in there and you have a ton of hides and you have the perfect temperature and humidity, then they should be fine. But you want to make sure that whether using a rack or an enclosure, their setups are still correct. You still have the right humidity, the right hot spot, and the right temperature on the cold side. The next big thing is pricing. So we'll just break it down. For example, the ones that I used to make, a 3x2x1, $255, and that is if it had recessed heat tape, so you don't have to worry about the heat, and that doesn't include lights. Most people like the LED lights. Those range in price as well depending on what size. Let's just call it $255 for a normal 3x2x1 setup, which comes with the heat tape recessed in. Around the same size equivalency is a 41 quart. It's actually about 17.5 wide by 36 or 38 deep, and it's about 6 inches tall. I use these as an example. These are 7 high. So these were sold for $465. That included the bins, and it included the heat tape again as well. Same heat tape, same size. Our open size racks is what I was making, and it was $460. So we can divide that by 7 because this holds 7 snakes. That means it's about $66 per animal for each of their setups. So just doing a little bit of quick math, if these are $66 per setup for each snake, and it was $255 for each snake for a 3x2x1, that means there's a $189 difference per enclosure for the animals. So if you have 20 snakes and you decide to go the PVC route, you could be paying almost $4,000 more for those animals compared to using racks. Everyone prices their cages and racks differently. That's just the obscure reptile and caging racks and enclosures that we used to make. That was their pricing. That's just to give you guys an example. If you're only planning to do, let's say, small scale breeding, that's fine if you only, want to have 3 or 4 3x2x1s, but then you also have to think of when you get babies. This is my hatchling rack. I'll put some more pictures of hatchling racks in there. Even if you're going to do small scale breeding, you're still going to probably want something like a hatchling rack. The baby shouldn't be in anything bigger than a 6-quart bin. If you wanted to make PVC enclosures that were that tiny, you could, but it's way easier to buy a 99-cent bin, set up some heat tape, and put lids on them, and make the proper setup, especially for hatchling things that you only have some times of the year. So if you're going to breed, you want to make sure you're doing what financially works for you. You want to make sure you have enough space for whatever you're planning to do, and you want to make sure realistically it is going to work. Because if you're going to have 30 baby snakes and you completely are against racks and you want to breed all those snakes and you're going to have 100 200 hatchlings, where are you going to put those hatchlings so that they thrive and they're in the proper setup? I wish I could have more front opening enclosures. I do for my boas because they do get larger, but since I've had my ball pythons for so long and they do all eat, they all have eggs consistently every year. They really thrive. They shed consistently, perfect sheds. I really don't plan on changing them to anything different because I feel like they are doing very, very well. They're all in very good health. So I think that racks, if done properly, be a great space saver. You can save money, and the animals can be comfortable if you do things right. I'm not saying throw newspaper in the bottom and a tiny little, Dixie cup as a water dish, and that's all you're going to do. You want to make sure they have the proper heat, humidity, water dishes, several hides, and a nice kind of bedding, so something that will hold humidity and that they can't hurt themselves by digesting. I also think enclosures can be awesome if done properly as well. For racks, you want to make sure you have all the proper sizes. Especially, let's say, if you're doing ball pythons, you don't want to just have 41 quart bins and you're trying to throw babies in them. You want to make sure you get the proper sizes. These are hatchling racks. This is the 6 quart. Then here's a step up. This is a combo. So this has the 12 quart bins and 28 quart bins turned sideways, or you can do the regular standard 28 quart bin rack like this, and then you want to upgrade to the 41 quart rack. I have a whole video explaining how large each ball python should be for each different size bin, so just make sure you're not sizing up too quick, stressing out that animal. And if you are going to do something like a larger enclosure, make sure it's not like a glass tank. Just spend a little extra money, get the PVC enclosure. It's going to help that animal tremendously, and make sure that they have everything they need inside that enclosure. But that's it for this video. If you guys have any questions, you can put them in the comments below. If you haven't subscribed already, please do. We do videos every single Wednesday, and we'll see you next Wednesday.